Hello, everyone. My name is Corinne, and if I were to describe myself, I'd say that I am a person who loves to read uh, and listen to music. But most of all, I really like learning about art history. Art history, and so as a consequence, for my course in college, I decided to take up. The humanities, and that's the study of the seven major arts. So that's painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, dance, music, theater. Uh, Basically, the humanities is a course that makes you appreciate these seven major arts and see how you can become a better person by immersing yourself in the appreciation of these seven major arts. So I proceeded with a teaching career in the humanities. Um, and on the side, I discovered my propensity, my liking for visual merchandising. That is basically some kind of art practice that you do in commercial spaces like malls. And so I started to do a bit of window displays and propping up merchandise in selling areas in um, specialty stores, no? And also some malls. No? 2003, 2006, I got the luck to study in Rome, Italy. Um, and there I discovered my um, my passion for the study of culture. So cultural diplomacy is an area that I've long been working on, such that in my PhD, uh, in my PhD course, I tried to look into um, international relations as my major. So backtrack, I took my my master's in the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where I studied Philippine art history for my master's course, and I decided to um, get into a research on the history of the Filipino souvenir store and Filipiniana displays. And so that brings us to um, the output, you know, of the output that I'm currently working on right now, which is a product of all this study of mine, no, for several years. The output is a course called Philippine Branding. So Philippine Branding has been a result of my passion for art, culture, that is mine, but at the same time, it covers this appreciation also of culture and art that isn't mine. So, what is what does it mean to brand things Filipino with the backdrop of the world? So this has been a project of mine. This course has been a project of mine for the past for the past 14 years. And so this Philippine branding course that I've been working on is really a work in progress. Uh, it's a work in progress since maybe around 2012. Um, it has actually been derived from the idea of nation branding, which I actually came across, um, yeah, 2011, way back 2011, as I was developing and finishing my MA thesis on the Philippine souvenir store and Filipiniana displays and the history of the Philippines. souvenir store in Philippines, United States. And Nation Branding was actually authored by Simon Arnholt, who is based in, I think, the US, and a couple of other uh, thought leaders from Europe. Um, they came up with the Nation Brand Index, which ranks countries according to um, their popularity, as a brand uh, around the world, as a global brand. And they actually base this like the branding formula, the a formidable and successful branding formula from yeah, like some kind of a point system, that looks into um, people, uh, the politics, the trade, the culture, um, also immigration and investment. So these are like some of the points that they look into, and depending on your rating, will you figure high or low in the brand index. So when upon realizing that, I thought about figuring out the position of the Philippines in vis-a-vis the nation brand index. Why? Because I realized we were really way below, you know, um, the rank of even some of the Asian countries that that are that are neighbors, that are near us, near our country. Countries like Malaysia or Singapore or Hong Kong, they rate uh, way higher than we do. And so I thought, how could we improve our situation and also um, have a way by which we can climb up the ladder, climb up the rank. And so I crafted a course called Philippine Branding, which will help, perhaps not the entire country altogether, uh, just like almost immediately, but to help services and companies, service to help the service industry or the consumer product industry. And so Philippine branding is something that has been like a product of my years of study on the Philippines, whether that's in the aspect of the artistic or the cultural or the historic. No? And because I tend to reflect a lot, no, and on this multi-dimensional aspect of the Philippines, I was able to figure out a way by which I can adjust, you know, the description of the country or an explanation of the country, um, from say industry to industry or from audience to audience. And I think I'm able to do that with more substance, no? Like, or more effectively, because I'm used to looking at uh, the problematic, no, of what is the Philippines about from a very broad perspective, because I've always been trying to explain it to non-Filipinos, no? And precisely uh, those instances happened when I was living in a very cosmopolitan city like Rome, and I was studying an international school, and we were very few Filipinos there, and so I had the challenge of explaining what my culture is about, what my history is about, what my country is about, um, to people of varied backgrounds, people of different races. So I'd always have to adjust my, like my explanation, or I'd always need to, like study, how I was going to explain what my racial background is about or what my culture is about, to various peoples like, I don't know, like Latin Americans or the Europeans or the Africans. And so that was when I began, 2003, 2006, to, you know, create frameworks of how to be able to explain, like my country, or like my nationality. And so when I came back home, uh, I immediately enrolled myself in UP so that I can know more about, I can know, better in a more formal way what our culture, what our history, what those are about. Because when I was in college, most of my exposure was on uh, Western art or Western history, in the humanities. And that was when I came across nation branding, which I was explaining earlier. And so what is the difference between nation branding and Philippine branding? So as I said, nation branding was actually pioneered um, by Simon Arnholt and, scholars of his kind who study the political economic situations of countries, no? Or, diplomacy or governance. And they actually look at nation branding from a political, economic perspective, also from, most of the time from, yeah, like also like a social cultural perspective, no? And it's a very, it's a it's an integrated marketing communications strategy, employed by countries today so that they can position themselves better, like in a global village. So they usually consult, um, Simon Arnholt with the rest of, the nation branding, scholars, so that they can better position themselves in the global marketplace, and, in, global political, the geopolitical, yeah, in geopolitics. So, what is the difference between nation branding and Philippine branding? So, Philippine branding is something supposedly that I pioneered. I've really not come across a literature that outrightly says that it's going to be talking about Philippine branding. People would talk about, Philippine branding from, the perspective of particular products. Like if it's Jollibee, then it talks about Philippine branding from its perspective. Or if you're going to be, looking at it from, say, a Miss Universe perspective, they talk about representation of the Philippines from, not from a beauty contest's perspective, or if it's, Manny Pacquiao as a representation of, being Filipino, and the values of being Filipino in sports. That's Manny Pacquiao, Manny Pacquiao's rendition, or like his version of, the Filipino brand, no, specifically, manifested in the arena of sports. Now, but Philippine branding, as I had proposed it, from, my, MA research, and now from now in my PhD research, Philippine branding uh, is is also like a formal, academic, and, very systematic approach to branding any Filipino product or any service, um, And yeah, and one considers a very yeah, like holistic approach towards that work of branding. Why? Because you take a look at um, you try to take a look at the psychological, anthropological, sociological, cultural, artistic perspective of this branding approach. So it's very multifarious, no? And it's multidimensional. So we are not just really looking at a particular reality, like maybe like a beauty contest or a competition in, you know, in terms of personal style, you know, or country representation in a beauty contest, or say a culinary experience in Jollibee, or maybe Manny Pacquiao as you know, like Filipino athlete. You know, so it goes beyond those, because it's an exercise in actually crafting a strategy to sell your product or service from a Filipino, um, particularly from the values of the Filipino um, reference. No? So what are the values of the Filipino? And these values are characteristics of um, the, the, the race, you know, or characteristics of the nation, you know, that, or yeah, the people of this, of a particular nation, that is now transferred to the qualities of the product. So you use these values as reference points, no? Or as um, brand concepts to develop a campaign or marketing strategy. So there is a need to understand what Filipino branding is about, because it's really not so easy to do. It's supposed to be, you know, employed to the advantage of uh, entrepreneurs and MSMEs, and practically anyone who would like to sell any consumer product that is from the Philippines, or even to promote a Filipino industry or a Filipino service. No? But it's not so easy, because the the process of using uh, concepts, and the process of using values and incorporated into the concept development that you're going to be doing alongside your plans, your brand strategy, your plans for the brand strategy will need to all be integrated. And it all needs to blend, it all needs to harmonize. So let me repeat. Um, this whole process of actually doing branding in the first place isn't so easy, because you need to be able to figure out what concepts, what ideas will you be putting together. You'd have to figure that out, after which you'd have to um, go through a process that is so specific of the branding, the science of branding. And what's difficult with branding that is Filipino is that you'd have to be able to know what Filipino is about from a multi dimensional perspective. So you can't just articulate Filipino from, say, a Pacquiao point of view or a Miss Universe point of view, or from the Pambansang Manok point of view, or from a Jollibee point of view. You can't, because that's not what Filipino is about. You're just scratching the surface, or yeah, you're just giving some kind of a specific example of what of what a Filipino product or representation can be. But you are really not so much using constructs or concepts that give that Filipino nature, the Filipino-ness, justice, because there's so much more to being Filipino than meets the eye, and just like any other culture. The French, I think, would refuse to accept, that they be defined as I don't know, like a stylish group of people, or the French that the French is actually very very much like an equivalent, or can be very much defined by their culinary arts. I think they're going to be refusing to acknowledge that, because definitely the French would like to um, you know, uh, be acknowledged. They'd want to be known for something that's beyond their food, something that's beyond their fashion, or even something that's beyond their whole historical experience. No? Definitely, they'd like to be known for the values that they've promoted in the French Revolution, for example. No? Equality, fraternity, liberty, égalité, fraternité, liberté. Or they also want to be known for their philosophers, Kant, um, and the rest of them, Voltaire, who really tried to, uh, put together what what the democracy is about, the rule of the people. So the Filipino can also be studied from, like from a more thorough, with from a more holistic perspective. Like, we really need to be more thorough about our knowledge of being Filipino and what the Philippines is about. So there are so many ways by which we can by which we can do that. So just the language alone, or the art historical timeline of the Philippines is very replete with meaning and with information. So that's why we have to know what to do. And Filipino branding is not going to be very easy, even if you're a branding expert, or you're an ad person. Because once you start to welcome the idea that you're going to be doing branding from a Filipino perspective, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to handle the subject of Filipino. And you can't water things down, or you can't shortchange like that process of incorporating what's Filipino. And so it requires research, it requires study for like for a good amount of time. You can't just also like read one book overnight, or say read Nole Matangere. No, um you'd have to read a variety of books. It's not just about, these are not just books about Rizal or Rizal's like literary opus, no. But you'd have to know the other heroes in Philippine history. It's not just the hero Rizal that you need to know. There's Gregoria del Pilar, there is Antonio Luna, there is Graciano Lopez Jaina, and and the rest. So you need to really take some time out of your usual expertise, your preferred readings, for you to get like get more information about what Filipino historical experience is about, or what being Filipino is about. Creatives today would really need to find the time to study, do research, and explore better, um, from a cognitive perspective, meaning from a knowledge perspective, like something that you need to learn intellectually. Um, what Filipino is about. So that basically means you have to hit the books, have to go to, say, libraries. I say libraries because there are a number of them. And or yeah, like surf the net for information about what the Philippines is about, and all its features, from its topography to its natural resources to the people. So the people will pretty much tell you about the racial identity of the nation, like, or the cultural identity of the nation. So it's not much the physical attributes of the land or the country, but it's more about the intangible heritage. What makes it what it is, uh, say, spiritually, or what makes it what it is, uh, like in culturally, say culturally. And that's when we will start to be able to define also identity from for say the global marketplace. Why is that important? Because the global marketplace is so dense, like it's so saturated. It's so packed, with a lot of products and goods that are coming from everywhere. And if we are creatives who would like to campaign and promote our own products, we might get discouraged by the amount of competition that we need to face. Whereas if we know what we're about, what distinguishes us from other identities, then we would have a better time, and we wouldn't get lost in the homogeneity, of it all. Everyone seems to be just swimming through like the same water, the same the same water, such that we all are beginning to look like one kind of fish. But there's so much of marine variety. There's so much of marine creatures around, and they're not just of one type. So creatives would need to expose themselves to knowledge about this identity, the Filipino identity, and not get lost with other information that might not contribute to their more effective communication of what being Filipino is about. Okay, so why would they also have to know about the Philippines' place in the world? Because if we just follow we follow the dictates of popular media or big media outlets or sources of information, we can really get disillusioned or even like discouraged altogether, because these yeah, like these channels or platforms of information might skip, altogether skip, uh, you know, the place of the Filipino. Why? Because, well, for many, they might think that we are really insignificant because we don't really have, like the same power, as other. We are not as powerful as other nations. No? That we actually are some just a cluster of insignificant isles, no, in this particular spot of Southeast Asia, and we don't really have a lot of, say, geopolitical clout, because we're not so big in land area. No? So I used to get so shocked when the teacher would say that in global politics, the Philippines doesn't really matter so much because we are not as big or as powerful as other countries. So I used to think that that was wrong, and that there was something wrong um, with that worldview, because I mean all peoples are the same. And yeah, the question is, what is the measure of a man, right? So all of us are all equal. If you really believe in justice, you would say that one person is as good as the other because they have this humanness present in them, and that's a lot. The dignity of each person would need to be acknowledged. So I think that our place in the world today would need to be reinvented, because there had been times when we ourselves had bungled up, in terms of representing ourselves in the global stage, or like our public persona, or yeah, like our our global appeal isn't really that striking. Our creatives today, our young creatives today, uh, any creative for that matter, if they're Filipino, would benefit a lot from a deeper and greater knowledge of Filipino culture. Why? Because culture is important. Culture is vital, um, to any society, to the survival of a civilization, because culture characterizes the way of life of people. Uh, it characterizes the way of life of the people, and culture evolves. Now, culture progresses, culture develops through time, and usually the best of what a culture, the best of a culture is what thrives, and it is what persists, through time. As a very famous Filipino anthropologist, Jesus Peralta, had said, uh, the best features of a culture remains, and in fact, through time, it it gets enriched. So for us Filipinos, this is true, right? So we know that we are known to be, like a hospitable group of people. We are known to be a friendly, amiable, and cheerful group of people. And I'm quite sure that these characteristic features um, of our race, uh, has just been passed on from one generation to the other. So we can just imagine that even in pre-Hispanic times, Filipinos who lived in those barangay clusters already had those qualities that can be described as such. Magiliw, mahinhin, mapagbigay, and all that. And so with that definition of culture, it's quite understandable why our creatives would benefit a lot from this, like knowing or understanding what culture is about. And so culture would need to be communicated in the output, creative output, the outputs of our young creatives, and at the same time, they themselves should be inspired by culture. So it actually, the idea of culture is very, it's pervasive. It should be able to influence the person, inspire the person, enrich the person in many levels. So it should be in fact, it should be at the very soul of what he creates, because culture basically constitutes his humanity, And for Philippine branding, if a person does Philippine branding, the cultural aspect of his humanity precisely is the one that makes him unique and different from the other human beings that he will find around him, especially outside the Philippines. And that's when it starts to matter in a global village, because in any ecosystem or in any like playing field, in any environment, I think engagements become more interesting if you learn from them, if you learn at each and every step of the way in the process of precisely holding that engagement. And that's precisely how it is in the global arena. So you want to be challenged by people who are with you in that arena. There's a lot of there can be like altercations, shall we say. There can be sparrings. There can be also dialogues. There can be discussions and all that. Why? Because there is heterogeneity. There is always something new that you can learn from the person next to you. So no one's really bored with some kind of cultural exchange, because there's always something new that you can learn from another culture. Like I remembered my first time in Thailand, and I had to deliver like a paper in a conference and talk about it, deliver the paper in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I remembered I loved it when I joined forums that also guested, or that also had as attendees Indians from the north of India, or people from the Netherlands, and people from Malaysia. So I really found them fascinating, because precisely they're very different from me. And so that openness to other culture is also very healthy. And definitely we're all encouraged to do that as creatives, so that we can, at every step of the way, enhance our creative thinking. It's very important and highly encourage that our creatives would need to know Philippine history, because they'll get to see facts about us, about who we are as a people. And sometimes we can ask, now, how do you verify if this historical data is a fact? Well, usually that is audited, no? So historical facts are actually audited. They've been tried and tested, they've been monitored, they've been observed, and the reason why they've lasted and they have figured in, like books that have been archived and have stood the test of time is because they hold within them credibility. They've been validated by a big number of people, experts, common everyday people, who've testified to the truth of those facts. So why do creatives need to know history? So that they know what is the metal and what is at the very marrow of Filipino-ness. No? And so we don't just really touch on surface level, but we go deep into the meat of the matter. So that's why history is important, because you get to see how the Filipino has evolved through time, and what perhaps are the values that he has carried within himself and that have influenced him all throughout time in constructing the nation. We say constructing the nation. So I'm inviting everyone, as many creatives, designers, those who are engaged in fashion or interior design, to join our course, because it's going to be very fun. There's so much to explore about this whole world, the whole universe of being Filipino. There's so much to our identity, our makeup, our history, our culture that meets the eye. There's so much of data about who we are as a people that still needs to be unearthed, should be decoded, because a number of them are also in Spanish. And I mean, a big number of our populace cannot really decipher what Spanish is about, or what Spanish, or what's many Spanish words mean. And for as long as we will not be able to, like decode some of our historical documents in Spanish, then I think that almost all that undecoded data will result to our lack of information on particular aspects of our history, or even particular aspects of our culture. So I think that the course will even spur even more. It will spur even more Filipinos to love who they are, and to want to know who they are. Not so much of love who they are, but the Filipinos should be able to really to really discover that there's so much more into them. There's so much more about who they are than meets the eye. So I think that is one of the greatest takeaways that you can have in this program. Also, the idea of application, application of concepts to particular outputs, whether that's design or even content for, say, the platform. So many of these will be explored in class. So who will benefit from taking the program? Well, a whole bunch of people, students of art, design. They can be young professionals. They can be heads of agencies or organizations, CEOs, startup founders, heads of government agencies, LGU representatives, and so on and so forth. Because all of us, I include myself and the rest of my friends in SOFA, are asking themselves this question. I'm asking myself this question: what is being Filipino about? Because it seems like many of our counterparts in Southeast Asia or Asia are giving a lot of importance to the question of racial identity and cultural identity. South Korea, for example, very obviously have gone ahead, in terms of devising a scheme and developing a scheme in order to, be able to campaign better and stronger about who they are as a people, and it very obviously that has, benefited them, and that it has resulted into very desirable results, successful results, very, very positive. So I suppose we Filipinos would also like to give that a try, especially in the fourth industrial revolution and the post-pandemic, wherein I foresee a world that will be growing smaller, that will be becoming smaller and smaller because of the digital, like these digital tools that have made us connect with one another in very casual ways, in very quick ways. So the world, the earth, is beginning to look more and more like our common home, and we all are just trying to help one another out in outlasting, outliving the problems around us, including, for example, global climate change and these calamities that can plague not just our country but other parts of the world. So there seems to be a lot of solidarity and attitude of oneness that is developing. So it's important that creatives today will be prepared for that eventual coming of a time when like practically the pandemic is over, and they are called to collaborate and engage with other peoples of the world, so that we can gain back the momentum that we had lost before the pandemic. Because really the world is progressing, developing, progressing. But like early 2020, the progress, the development of countries around the world had been put to a stop. So it's because we need to address the pandemic problem. So we encourage everyone to take a look at our course, to learn more and to prepare themselves for the eventual reopening of the world, wherein there will definitely be a demand, in this whole idea of campaigning for the local. In our case, that's promoting what being Filipino is about and what the Philippines is about in a highly digital and contemporary age. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you soon.